We do this every month, and it's Steve's turn to do our arguing with a liberal. Steve Chisholm, here he is. Give him a big hand.
Thank you. I wore my loud shirt tonight to make sure you could hear me. Come on. Work the room here. All right, so tonight we are going to continue our arguing with a liberal, or as some of you call it, arguing with idiots. We never like to argue with a fool, though, as you've been told. If people are watching, they might not be able to tell the difference.
Can't hear you.
You can't hear me.
Hold the mic a little closer.
Okay. Okay. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about one of liberalism's favorites, Social Security. The problem with liberalism, of course, is that it fails every time it's tried. No matter what the form it takes over the last couple hundred years, that could be anything from paganism to socialism to fascism, communism, liberalism fails. Why does it fail? Because it relies on other people to help you to achieve your goals. Conservatism, on the other hand, is something that is successful every time it's tried. Of course, it has to actually be tried, unlike some of our current conservatives that we see in Washington, D.C. They don't really try conservatism and give it a chance. If they did, then we would always have freedom. It would be unleashing the human spirit, advancing the human cause as it was. Unfortunately, most Americans, as we know, are generally conservative in their own personal lives. They will lead their checkbooks in a conservative way. They live their life in a conservative way. Most people are not reckless with their own causes. Unfortunately, we are not out there advocating for conservatism. On a regular basis, we do not advocate what we believe. We do not pass on these traits. Some people are afraid or are just unable to take a stand and pass on our own viewpoint. There's many reasons, of course. Some of it's we're not trained to do so. It's just one of those things, just like public speaking. A lot of people aren't comfortable doing that. They don't want to be confrontational. Nobody likes to be in somebody's face and being argued with. There's always fear of ridicule, which we see all the time. That's a tactic that the liberals will take. They want to ridicule you, make you look like you're some kind of a country bumpkin. But of course, we do need to take a stand. It's very important that we pass on these traits, and more importantly, we want to pass these traits on to the youth. We have to pass this on because they are the next generation. And as Ronald Reagan once said, of course, freedom must be fought in every generation, for freedom is only one generation away from extinction. When we go out and we argue with a liberal, it's good to use the facts, as John Adams and Ronald Reagan both said. Facts are stubborn things. Now, it's not to say that liberals won't try to ignore the facts, but it does make it rather hard if you actually have them. We also don't necessarily want to argue, even though that's our theme here, is arguing with liberals. If you're actually going to try to convince the opponent, if you will, and win them over, you need to win the hearts and minds of your subjects. You need to have something in common. You need to blend that together before you can present the facts. Otherwise, the facts just don't have a fighting chance. What's going to happen is they're just going to hear what you said first and say, okay, and then they shut down and they're done. If you do have the opportunity to talk to them about Social Security, which is, of course, one of their sacred cows, we want to talk about it. It's been the law of the land now for 67 years. 1935. How many of you guys are over the age of 73? I don't really need to see too many hands, but I know there's a few of you. One of the things, yes, Robert, you're looking pretty good for 73. Sweet. Good genes, I guess. Over a generation, we have had Social Security as the law of the land. Over a generation. And we're told yet that people would starve without it. They'd be eating cat food, right? We've all heard the stories. They're all going to be dying eating cat food because without Social Security in the nanny state, these old people just wouldn't stand a fighting chance. Now, of course, this is disingenuous. It's based on a lot of sensationalism and lies. Those of you that are old enough, if you're 73, you were at least 5 years old when it was originally passed. And this came into being in the law. And how many of you, when you were 5, remember seeing, like, you know, senior citizens dying on their front porch? I remember, like, digging out the bodies and stuff. It did not happen. They weren't there. And why is it that we have this passed? There was 25 million Americans now that are over the age of 73. And yet there is no proof that we had all of these people that were just dying left and right. It'd be very hard, in fact, to do that in America. Because what would you do? You would have to work at it. If you really wanted to starve yourself, you'd have to hide it. Everybody is out there. There's very few people that really live in the woods today that are just not seen by anybody. That we do have shut-ins, but it's very, very difficult to hide that. Okay? Without Big Brother, though, we are supposed to be expected to think that we're such an immoral people that we would just let our families and our friends and our neighbors starve to death and wither away. Where is the precedent for it? We need to ask questions. One of the tactics that liberals like to use is to just get in your face and say, no, that's not true, that's not true. Ask them questions. If you ask them questions, they very seldom have an answer. They will just change the subject. Liberals, of course, have the practice of stereotyping us as being blamed for all of these things as unsophisticated conservatives, and we're prejudiced. And yet, of course, it's the socialists that are the ones that like to lump all of those over 65 into a category of being useless, past your prime, no longer of value in the workforce. Okay? Where did people go when they were 65, back before Social Security came along? People went past, well, they didn't all die. I mean, you know, they didn't just die. Yes. There you go. Parents and grandparents lived with their families. Okay? It wasn't up to the nanny state. Okay? You would actually take them into your home and you would care for them at that point. Some people actually worked beyond 65. Retirement was kind of a foreign subject to generations prior to the last two. There was no such thing as retirement. You worked until you couldn't work any longer, and then you lived with your family, and that's how it was. Of course, we don't do that anymore. Are we really going to be pushing grandma off the cliff? We've all seen the commercials, right? You've seen that. Yes, grandma's in a wheelchair. That's what conservatives, is that what we're really going to do? Anybody? I mean, liberals or conservatives, we're not going to push people off the cliffs. It's just highly disingenuous. Of course, Social Security, if we're honest, is a Ponzi scheme. We've all heard that term, right? Thanks to Bernie Madoff. Social Security was never set up to be the sole vehicle for retirement. That is not what it was intended to do. It was not just there to support the elderly. While it was there to help the weakest among us, that was not the entire purpose. Of course, we hear it now called a safety net. But is it really a safety net? At this point, our system is broken and has become more of a hammock. Okay, people will lounge around and take advantage of that. And it's not just the elderly. Unfortunately, it is not only something that's being learned by the youth. And if you look into a Social Security office, some of you may have seen pictures of this online at different places. The Social Security office, you look around and there's 2 seniors in the room. And there are probably 30 or 40 people wandering around there looking for their checks, and they're all under the age of 30. Why are they there in a Social Security office? They've been encouraged to abuse the system. We need to change that. Young people should not be forced into a state of slavery to cover this up. The government does not create wealth, it only steals wealth. It steals from those who are creative and it redistributes it to those who are not. The baby boomers are now coming into the retirement age that just kind of started in the last 2 years. The baby boomers generation is actually currently the largest in our U.S. history. This is the largest generation now coming into retirement. And who's going to pay for this retirement? Who's going to pay the Social Security? It can't be my generation. I'm lumped into Generation X. Generation X is the smallest generation since they've been keeping track, and we just don't have enough people. No matter what happens, we cannot pay unless they, of course, increase taxes and increase taxes, which, don't put it past them, that's what they want to do. What's going to happen then? We have the Generation Y group that is just now coming into the workforce for the last couple of years, and they are actually going to be bigger when it's all said and done than the baby boom generation. The problem with that is, thanks to Obama and some of his tactics, by slowing down our economy, what's happening? These guys are coming out of college, they can't find a job. If they don't have a job, how are they going to support the baby boomers that are retiring? Okay, it's a catch-22, it's not going to work. What's going to happen also, we have one more problem, thanks to other liberal policies. 9 authoritarian liberals, back in 1973, decided it was okay for us to murder babies in the womb. 9 people decided that it was okay to forcibly pass a law that nobody else voted for and slaughtered 40 million future workers. They're not here to support the older generations. These workers never grew up. They never got a job. They never contributed to society. They never put a dime into Social Security. How's that for a choice? Liberal policies, of course, since Social Security first came out, had a couple other things. It was optional. When it first passed, FDR said it will be voluntary. No longer is it voluntary. In the 1980s, if you had a card from before that, anybody who still has a Social Security card, it said, this is not to be used for identification purposes. Your new cards don't say that. Now it's used for everything. You have to put your ID on all kinds of stuff. Every website, all kinds of things. They want your Social Security number before you do anything. When it first passed, there was only 1% of your income was taken for Social Security tax, up to the first $1,400. Now it's 7.65% for the first $90,000. It used to be tax deductible. Thank you for the Democrat Party again. It is now taxable. It used to be locked up in a trust fund. We all heard that one, right? The trust fund? Well, it was, technically, until Lyndon Baines Johnson and the Democrat Party at that time decided, you know what? Let's put it in the general fund and we'll just use it for the Great Society. And it's still there. Or actually, it's nowhere. Retirees, of course, never used to be taxed on annuity funds. Yeah, well, thank you to Clinton and Gore. Gore was the deciding vote, breaking a tie of 50-50 in the Senate when he was president of the Senate. That is now taxable. Up to 85% of your Social Security, they will tax. Jimmy Carter, of course, this is a good one, voted to allow illegal immigrants who had never put a dime into the system to come to America without any paperwork and now can receive Social Security even though they never paid a dime. The Democrats have tried to pass a new law since the early to the mid-2000s. Again in 2010, it was H.R. 4646. That would allow 1% tax on all bank transactions. Luckily this is not passed yet, but it's still floating around in Congress. So if you hear it come up again with your congressman, you need to be all over this. They decided that any bank transaction, credit cards, deposits, anything you do, you write a check, it's 1% tax, and that will go to the government. And believe it or not, yes, Social Security would have that if you have it directly deposited into your bank account. So there's another 1% tax on the taxes you've already paid into the program for the entire life. So you can see that these whole things have been perpetuated as a lie. It was not intended to be what it is, and now they've manipulated the system so much that even what it was intended to be is overtaxed again and again and again. The time is going to come, and in fact it's probably already here, when the next generation is going to have to forego Social Security. If we do not, there's going to be no options. We will not have Social Security for our generation or the next. It's okay to have it for those that have already paid in and they've done that, but eventually we're not going to be able to say, I paid in, I want what's mine. The youth are going to have another option. And it's been bantered around for the last 20 or 30 years to have an option to pay a private retirement account and just opt in and take certain payments out. If it doesn't happen, sooner or later, it's going to go belly up, the whole system. Social Security and all of its liberalism, all of these socialistic policies, as always, only lead to America ending up on the ash heaps of history. Thanks.
Steve, there's a question. Steve, I have a question for you.
Stand up.
After listening, stand up, not a problem.
I want to hear you.
Okay. You know Dan, I'll project. I have a question for you, Steve. I was really not certain how you were portraying Social Security. Most people who have, I guess, who worked since Social Security came into place 1936 to 1937 have contributed. Not voluntarily, but they've contributed to Social Security. Are you trying to say this is an entitlement, or they're not entitled to it? I wasn't sure from what you said. I believe that it's not an entitlement, that people pay for it. They should be getting compounded interest. They should be getting a lot more than they're getting. And what has happened, as you pointed out, is that Lyndon Johnson came in and kind of took over the system. But let's not forget what people pay. And I think I was not clear where you stood. Can you help me out, please?
Sure. There's a lot of answers to that. Where I stand is that there should be an option for those who are now coming into the system, that they should be able to opt out and not continue to carry only Social Security. That's not going to be enough.
Define the age when you're saying that, please. What age? At the age of 21 or what?
I don't care if you're 15, if you can get a job, good luck. Anybody from the age of 15 up until 40. If you want to opt out of the program...
That's all I wanted to know, the parameters.
I mean, I don't think anybody that's over 55 is going to opt out. It would be stupid on their behalf to do that. I mean, they've paid into it for 30 years of their life. Why would you opt out? But there's going to come a point where they need to have the option. It can't be just supported indefinitely. There's just not enough numbers. There's not enough money. It's not, the system is going to collapse on its own. If we don't just keep stealing from the general fund, kicking the can down the road and borrowing from China, the elderly are not going to have what they've paid into. Well, now, granted, it's not like an entire funding system. It was never intended to be your only source of retirement, and it really shouldn't be.
Yes, it was.
Well, actually, no, it wasn't. If you, well, it wasn't. You can read FDR's own notes and letters.
I will.
That's fine. It was not intended to be like we're going to cover everybody forever, because obviously at 1% tax for $1,400, well, that's $14. $14 a year? What are you going to do for $14 a year? You couldn't feed your cat. It's just, there was no way. And compound interest wasn't going to do it unless, of course, you lived for 300 years. Just like, you know, the Indians that we traded for Manhattan, okay, if I had compound interest on that, I could buy all of Manhattan today. But that's compound interest over 236 years.
We're talking about.
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
the finance person, I'll give you that crap.
Recognize, and I don't know if you espoused it, most people back then didn't live the years that they're living today.
That's right, they died younger.
Well, they have expanded the age of Social Security and all that, and that's fine. And yes, it's true, they were not having the average life expectancy, but that's not to say that people didn't live that long. I mean, some of our founding fathers lived into their 80s. If you go back even further, I mean, you know, we can really dig deep if you want to go biblical. We've got people who live 900 years, so I mean, it's not the average. It's not the average, but you know, there was always people that were the exception to the rule, but the average lifespan, you know, you had lots of people, but the lifespan, while you had people that lived 70 or 80 years, the average lifespan was brought down because women died in childbirth and a lot of kids didn't live past the age of 10. So if you added all those in, that's why the lifespan expectancy was different. So anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you.